You probably learned it when you were 4 years old. Some teacher or parent or older kid taught it to you on the playground. You held hands, you went in a circle, and at the end, everyone fell down laughing. Ring around the rosies, a pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Cute, right? Just a little song, just a little game. Except, according to a story that millions of people believe, it isn't cute at all. According to this story, Ring Around the Rosies is a secret coded message smuggled through centuries of childish games, a survivor's whisper about one of the most horrifying events in human history, the Black Death. The Rosies, people say, is a rosy red ring that appeared on the skin of plague victims, one of the first signs that you have been infected and you would soon be dead. The pocket full of posies, those were flowers and herbs that medieval people carried to mask the smell of rotting bodies in the streets. Ashes, ashes, the sound of sneezing, a symptom of the disease, or the ash from a mass cremation of the dead, and we all fall down. Death, everyone dies. Every single one. You were taught this as a toddler, and the whole time you were reenacting a 14th century pandemic that killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. That's the story. It's been repeated in classrooms, in pub quizzes, on history blogs, in casual conversations for decades. It sounds exactly like the kind of dark secret history keeps. It's specific, it's detailed, it's disturbing. There's just one problem. It's almost certainly not true. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because if you go looking for actual evidence that the ring around the rosies has anything to do with the Black Death, and historians have looked, you'll find almost nothing. And what little you do find points you in the wrong direction entirely. The Library of Congress has addressed this directly. Their verdict? The plague origin story itself is folklore, not history. They even have a name for it, meta-folklore, a folk legend about a folk song, a rumor that became its own piece of mythology. And the Library of Congress's conclusion is blunt. The plague explanation is probably not true. But why probably not true? Let's actually look at the evidence, because this is where it gets really interesting and a little bit embarrassing for anyone who's ever confidently repeated the plague story at a dinner party, including, quite possibly, you. Let's start with the most basic question any historian will ask. Where does the rhyme actually appear? The earliest known printed version in English comes from 1881. That is 530 years after the Black Death ravaged Europe in the 1340s. 5 centuries of complete silence in the written record. No mention of the rhyme, no reference to it, nothing. And then it appears in a Victorian children's book. Now, oral tradition can survive without being written down. That's possible. Allegedly encoding one of history's greatest catastrophes, you'd expect something to surface before 1881. A diary entry, a letter, a single passing reference? There simply is none. And then there's the plague theory's key piece of evidence, the sneezing. A tissue, and we all fall down. That's the version people cite as the smoking gun. Except, and this is the part that collapses that whole argument, that version isn't the original. The 1881 printed version doesn't say a tissue at all. It says, ring around the rosies, a pocket full of posies, hush, 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 hush. We all tumbled down. No sneezing, no ashes, hush, 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 and tumbled down. Not fell down, tumbled, like children do when they're playing a game. And it keeps unraveling because when folklorists looked at the collected version of the rhyme from around the world and across time, they found something that the plague theory absolutely cannot account for. The words are all different. Some versions have a bottle full of posies, some have a pot full of posies, some have children squatting, some have them curtsying, some have them jumping back up. If the rhyme was carefully preserving specific plague message for 5 centuries, why does every village seem to have completely different versions? Secret codes don't usually come in 17 regional flavors. And the final nail, the plague theory itself didn't even appear in print until 1961, a book called The Plague and the Fire by James Leazor. That's not ancient oral tradition. That's a mid-century book, probably read by some school teachers, repeated in classrooms, and then repeated online until it felt like an established fact. The ancient secret is 60 years old. So if it's not the plague code, what is it? The honest answer is we don't know for certain. But the best evidence suggests it is exactly what it looks like: a children's circle game. Kids hold hands, walk in a ring, and at the end, they do something: fall, squat, curtsy, jump, tumble, and they get back up and do it again. That's it. That's the whole thing, probably with different words in every town, passed from older children to younger ones, generation to generation, for reasons that had nothing to do with the disease and everything to do with the fact that children like spinning in circles and falling over. But here's where it gets genuinely strange and genuinely wonderful. Because folklorists who actually went out and collected the versions of this game in the 20th century found some variations that are not what you'd expect. Ethnomusicologists John and Ruby Lomax collected folklore songs across America in the mid-20th century. And somewhere in Texas, they recorded a version of Ring Around the Rosies that bears almost no resemblance to the nursery rhyme you know. It includes lines like, "Light bread, sweet bread, squat, Mr. Red was her lover." And these actions, if a child loved the person in the middle of the circle, they hugged them. If they hated them, they stomped on their foot. This is a children's game collected from a real playground in Texas, and it involves a character named Mr. Red, the conditional foot stomping based on romantic feelings. The plague version had nothing on this. And that is exactly the point. Oral folk traditions don't preserve messages intact. They mutate. They absorb the local flavor wherever they land, they pick up words and shed old ones. They mean different things in different places. A rhyme that says hush, 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 hush in one town says a tissue in another, and has Mr. Red and foot stomping in a third. That's not a code. That's just how folk songs work. So how does a theory with so many holes in it become something that millions of people treat as an absolute fact? Well, James Lesueur's 1961 book connected the rhyme to the plague. It was a popular history book, not an academic study, but it sounded authoritative. It had specifics, and specifics sometimes feel like evidence even when they aren't. Someone read it, told someone else, a teacher heard it and mentioned it in a class. A few students went home and told their parents, and the story spread the way all good stories spread. Not because it was verified, but because it was interesting. This is how misinformation travels. Not through lies exactly, through a story that feels true. The plague explanation has everything a good story needs. It's dark, it's specific, it reframes the familiar as sinister. It makes you feel like you are in on the secret, and of course, it spread. And then the internet arrived. And a story that once spread through classrooms and dinner parties could now reach millions of people overnight. Forum posts, YouTube videos, fun facts, accounts on every platform. The plague theory became the default explanation, cited as fact, repeated without sources, copy and pasted so many times that searching for Ring Around the Rosies now returns the plague story before it returns anything else. Think about that for a second. A theory invented in a 1961 book, unsupported by an actual historical record, contradicted by the text of the oldest known version of the rhyme, is now so deeply embedded that most people you know believe it. Maybe you believed it. You were probably taught it. And that's not a small thing, because what happened here has a name. Here's the part that I think is actually the most fascinating thing of the entire story. And it is the part that most debunking videos miss entirely. The Library of Congress doesn't just say that the plague theory is wrong, they say it became a meta-folklore, a folk legend about a folk song. The rumor spread orally, in books, in classrooms, online, until it became genuinely an authentic part of the rhyme's culture story. Think about what that means. Ring Around the Rosies possibly started as a circle game with no meaning beyond the pleasure of spinning and falling down. it accumulated different words in different towns. It got written down in 1881 in a Victorian children's book, and then in 1961, someone wrote a book that gave it a backstory. And people loved that backstory so much that they told it and retold it and taught it to their children until the dark backstory became as real a part of the rhyme as the words themselves. The plague story is folklore now. It just happens to be folklore invented last century by a popular history writer rather than medieval peasants. Which, when you think about it, is exactly how folklore has always worked. Someone makes a story up, people pass it on because it resonates, and eventually the story becomes true, in the way that all stories eventually become true. Not as fact, but as meaning. Ring Around the Rosies was almost certainly not a secret plague warning. There is no credible historical evidence that it was. The words don't match, the dates don't match, the variations are too wild, the theory appeared too late. The folklorists, the historians, and the Library of Congress all say the same thing. Probably not. What it was, most likely, is something far simpler and far more human. A group of children somewhere, some time ago, we don't know exactly when or exactly where, held hands, walked in a circle, sang some words that sounded right, and fell down laughing. And somewhere nearby, slightly older children were watching. And they taught it to the next group, and on and on and on, through villages and towns and playgrounds and schoolyards for longer than anyone can trace. No plague, no code, no secret message from the dead, just kids spinning in circles, falling down, getting back up. And isn't that a better story anyway?